Today's episode is with Joseph
So
South.
that opens up your entire cloud environment to the whole world. Now it's IAM, and that's just an account, a password. It's never not been, our primary focus of attention because major companies are getting breached via IAM, saying, "Oh, you can't enforce this. It's making it too secure. Doesn't add any value." These environments can explode very rapidly before security even gets involved. The cloud had over 400,000 accounts. You can identify the owner of these accounts. In the cloud, tagging is everything. Let's look at the accounts that are actually being used by people. Every single cloud has a different term for every single thing. One S3 bucket that's made public is now a foothold. It shouldn't be the destination where people go and they just get no every single time they ask for something.
Hi everyone, this is Purushottam and thanks for tuning into Scale to Zero podcast. Today's episode is with Joseph South, or we call him Joe. Joe is the host of Security Unfiltered podcast. He's currently a principal cloud security engineer at Volkswagen Financial Services. He has close to a decade of experience in cybersecurity. He started his career in IAM, and that is one of the topics we will be chatting about today. And a fun fact, he's a collector of rare whiskeys as well. So, Joe, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast. For our audience, do you want to briefly share about your journey?
Yeah, sure. First off, thanks for having me on. I really do appreciate it. Thanks for all of your flexibility. My schedule is insane, as I'm sure we'll talk about later on. Um, but yeah, my journey into security, I guess, is a bit of a challenging one because I got work experience in IT, just basic help desk stuff in college. And I figured after college, I'm going to go into law enforcement, I'll go into the government or something like that, right? And so I'll just do some IT work to make some money for these student loans until I can get into like my real career. I actually disliked IT help desk a whole lot. I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. And I couldn't imagine myself taking a career like that. And in my first job right out of college, the person who was mentoring me at the company that I was working at mentioned, "Hey, you have a pretty good mentality for cybersecurity." I had never heard of cybersecurity or anything like that. But he, inquired me or really, encouraged me to pick up the Security Plus book and start reading it. And he said, if I'm interested, from there, maybe it's something that I should go down. And I picked up the Security Plus book and I couldn't put it down, to be honest. I read it cover to cover several times when studying for my exam. And I found the stuff really interesting. I found myself researching it, during work, after work, thinking about it constantly. And so that kind of started my 2.5 year journey of getting into cybersecurity because then, I felt, okay, I'm going to go into cybersecurity, right? I figured, 6, 7 months of studying really hard and whatnot, I'll get into it. Little did I know, 2.5 years later, is when I finally got into a security dedicated role. And that whole process was very frustrating for me because everyone was telling me I was doing all the right things, but I didn't have experience with these, multi-million-dollar solutions that companies have. And so they're like, "Oh no, we're not going to take you because you don't have this experience," but there's no way
Mm-hmm.
for me to get that experience. Um, yeah. So that's a small gist of it. And that's kind of where I started my podcast with that mentality of helping others get into this field that I love.
Love that. One thing I really loved is you had a mentor early on who sort of guided you towards cybersecurity, right? And that's often the challenge that we see today. That a lot of folks want to get into cybersecurity, but they don't know where to start from. And hopefully, your podcast is helping new entrants to the cybersecurity world.
Yeah, I surely hope so. And, I always tell everyone I'm always open, for a conversation. I'm always open for a message on LinkedIn or wherever it might be. Because I do remember when I was trying to get in and I would be messaging people in security, and I mean, 9.9 times out of 10, I would never get a response. And it was the most frustrating thing because all I wanted to
Yeah.
do was just get some guidance, like, hey, what am I
Hmm.
doing wrong? What could I do better? Where should I be focusing right now? All of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Not trying to be a burden on anyone. And so that's why I have the podcast. And that's why I always tell anyone, if you have any questions, if you need a mentor, just reach out. I'm more than happy to help.
And we will try to add all the details about your podcast when we publish this episode also, so that it reaches to more listeners or more audience.
Awesome. Yeah,
um,
that would be great.
Absolutely. So before we start the recording, I generally ask this question to all of our guests, and I get unique answers depending on the job role, the and different stages of life, right? So what does a day in your life look like today?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. So my day starts at about 8 or 9 o'clock, and I don't get done until about midnight or 1 a.m. Um, and my day, every day is different, right? So, like you said, I'm in charge of all cloud security engineering at Volkswagen Financial, and so that in and of itself is a huge task, right? So that's taking on everything and anything in the cloud, working with developers, making sure that they're creating secure code, as well as working with other solutions that we have internally that are monitoring the cloud um, for its own infrastructure, security, and making sure that the code that we're putting in there is getting put into secure infrastructure and secure architecture, and responding to different incidents, and also putting out what I call fires of discovering, oh hey, we're in a new cloud and we've been in there for a while now, and now I have to go figure out what's going on over there, pretty last minute, right? I need to be on top of it.
So sort of varied set up tasks across varied set of security areas. If I want to summarize your day.
Yeah, I would say that that's pretty accurate. And I always tell everyone cloud security is a more graduated security domain, right?
Hmm.
You don't go straight into cloud security. That would not be a good idea. You would want to get experience in other domains of security, because in cloud security, all of it's combined, right? So I
Yeah.
have IAM experience, I have endpoint security, infrastructure security experience, some light network security experience. Well, every day I'm using all of those skills that
That
I
makes
learned.
sense. And one of those areas we're going to talk about today is the IAM, right? So, and as I said in the intro as well, that you started your career in the IAM as well. So let's dig in. So, in a recent summit in October, you presented a session on mapping the battlefield by untangling cloud IAM challenges. So IAM in particular has been in our lives for over a decade. I believe IAM was one of the earliest, like Cloud IAM was one of the earliest services provided by, let's say, AWS. So why do you think it still needs attention? Isn't it solved already?
Yeah, I wish it was solved. If really, if anything in security was solved, I'd be out of work. But it with IAM, when we're talking about IAM on prem,
Hmm.
that's behind a firewall, it's behind network security, it's behind all these other things. Even infrastructure security would be before IAM security in an on-prem environment. When we're talking about the cloud, anyone can pull up awsportal.com or whatever it is. It might be aws.com. Um, and they can just log in with credentials, right?
Hmm.
And so that opens up your entire cloud environment to the whole world to be attacked. Now, AWS does a pretty good job at
Hmm.
securing their portal, so there is different hoops that people would have to jump through to get to it, but it doesn't make it any easier, negate the fact that IAM is now the perimeter, where it used to be a firewall, it used to be your network security. Now it's IAM, and that's just an account, a password, and hopefully, if you're really good, an MFA token.
So well, that's a very good point. But why do you think it is getting a lot of attention recently? Why is it today versus, let's say, 5 years ago? Or it has been the case always? It's just that uh, maybe there are some factors which are affecting why IM is getting attention recently.
Well, I think it's kind of twofold, right? In security, it's never not been our primary focus of attention. In security, it's always been truly about IAM at the end of the day. It's getting more attention recently, though, is because major companies are getting breached via IAM. They're getting
Hmm.
breached by users legitimately logging in, as a real user and wreaking havoc in their environment. I'm thinking about, companies like Okta or
Hmm.
MGM, these huge breaches. And, especially with Okta, right? They're the leader in SSO and they got
Yeah.
breached. Like that's a huge thing. There's I don't think I could name a company that I worked for that didn't have Okta, in their
Yeah.
environment, right? Like they're
Yeah.
they're so widely used and they still got breached. So
Hmm.
it's becoming more of the forefront in people's minds, but in security, it's always been there, right? And
Hmm.
there's a lot of different politics at play in different organizations. And so, a lot of the times organizations would push back hard on security, saying, oh, you can't enforce this, it's making it too secure, doesn't add any value. And now with all of these public attacks and public breaches, now we're able to say, like, no, we have to do this. If we
Hmm.
don't do this, we're going to get breached just like these other people over here.
And this goes back to what you said earlier, right? Um, like two things. One is these are some of the reasons why IAM has become the new perimeter versus network. And when it comes to cloud, it's as simple as an attacker logging in, like getting to the password. That's where there is a lot of phishing attacks are also happening, right? To get through your cloud environment. Whereas in case of on-prem, it was much difficult to get in.
Right.
A follow-up question to that is, and you highlighted this in your talk as well, is that the ability to create users and roles at will is advantage and of the cloud and also downfall of cloud IAM. So for our audience, can you share why you think that's the case?
Yeah. So it's an interesting topic because, when you think of the cloud is supposed to be this blank slate for
Hmm.
developers and engineers to go into and just build, not worry about anything else. They can just build. They don't have to worry about resources. The cloud has it all.
Hmm.
Um, and so when we're talking about IAM, um, the, these environments can explode very rapidly before security even gets involved. I
Right.
have a good friend of mine. He's the director over IAM at a large
Hmm.
company, and he said that the company had existed and moved into the cloud, really before they had an official security team kind of formed because it's a younger company. And when he got involved, the cloud had over 400,000 accounts already in their
Wow.
environment. And that was over the course of maybe a year,
Mhm.
and in
Wow,
terms of
that's
cloud
madness.
standards, yeah. So, he walked into this situation and, when he interviewed, the people even told him, like, hey, we probably have about, between 20 and 40,000 accounts. And he said, okay, that's large, but we can deal with that. And he gets in and he actually does a real, analysis. He actually reached out to me to, instruct him on how to do a deep dive analysis into this. And he found 400,000 accounts. It's like, okay, that's a little bit bigger than what you guys told me before.
That is even more maddening than what it started with, right? So
Right.
if that's the case, like since you advise your friend in that case, right? So I'm curious, like, what was your advice? Like, how do organizations deal with these kinds of scenarios then?
Yeah, really the best way to go about it is hopefully you can identify the owner of these accounts. In the cloud, tagging is everything, right? And so any good security program in the cloud will enforce tags on every asset in the cloud, every account, role, everything, because it shows who owns it, who created it, that sort of thing. So that was the first thing I told him to keep in mind. And then we started looking at the accounts that, wasn't used, that were
Okay.
over permissioned. All of those, kind of outliers, I would say, right? Anything that a regular account that is used shouldn't look like. So, maybe it hasn't been used in a year. Maybe it's got global admin permissions in the environment. Maybe there's 50 of these accounts, right?
Hmm.
And you start weeding them out, and as you get your list of viable accounts down, you get that actual list, then you start reaching out to these teams and saying, hey, what accounts do you actually need? What accounts can we combine here? What roles can we combine here? And you start dialing it back, but that takes a very long time. It took a year to create this problem. It's going to take them probably 5 years to unravel it.
That makes sense. I'm curious now. I would love to follow, like, continue on the same use case that you had. So if we dig deeper, right, into, let's say, that 40,000 accounts, there are several types of identities, right? Human identities, machine identities. There could be third-party identities as well. So, how should organizations prioritize their security configurations for IAM? Let's say when you got into that situation and you looked at these three types of identities, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? How do you prioritize?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, I'm going to look at the human identities for sure.
Okay.
Let's look at the accounts that are actually being used by people, and these accounts are doing different things in the environment. Let's look at their permissions,
Mhm.
and make sure that we don't have several different roles that are doing the exact same thing in the environment. Can we combine these roles here? Because when you do that, I mentioned it before, but when you do that, you're lowering your attack surface, right? You're lowering the probability of someone reaching out to a random person in your environment and somehow getting access to, let's say Azure or AWS, right? And now they have global admin because this random account has too many permissions when they shouldn't have had that.
Mhm.
Then I'm going to start looking at the different machine accounts, right?
Okay.
So in the cloud, this is really more of, I think it's typically called a service account
Mhm.
within most clouds. I mean, this is the issue with cloud security, right? Every single cloud has a different term for every single thing, even though they're doing the same thing. And so you're learning different languages essentially.
Right.
Um, you know, but then I'm focusing on the service accounts because those are the accounts where, you know, you could have a service like, let's just say, S3 communicating to CloudFront or EC2s. And if you don't have that role or permission locked down,
Mhm.
one S3 bucket that's made public is now a foothold in your environment to the rest of your EC2s or to the rest of your AWS environment overall. And so you really
Yeah.
want to control, what is talking to what and how much
Mhm.
permissions it actually has. And then finally, of course, I would take a look at third party accounts. Who outside of our organization has accounts in our environment? Why do they have it? Do they need it? And kind of do an attestation of those accounts and
Mhm.
verifying with the vendor and the business unit saying, hey, do we still have this contract? Is it still active? Are they using it? Do we need to give them access still? Answering all of those questions will really determine, if you can shut off that access or not. And a lot of the times, these accesses, they get forgotten about. I
Mhm.
used to work on the other side of IT, right? I used to work on help desk, and I can't tell you the amount of times that, we would no longer allegedly have access to a customer, but we would still have access. I could still get in there. I could still log into my machine. You know, people will just say that you don't have access, but then they won't do anything on the back end to actually ensure you don't have access.
Yeah, I think the like I really like the last part where you highlighted that for vendors where you are not in contract anymore, at least you should clean up, because that's a much bigger risk versus vendors who are active today, and it's often overlooked.
Right.
So if I change the scenario a little bit, that instead of you going into an organization where there is chaos, let's say if you're starting from scratch, what are your top three things that you will focus on, like particularly in IAM?
Yeah, it's a great question. First I would start thinking about everything from a least privilege perspective. When we were talking when we were just on prem, just in our, fairly local data centers, least privilege was kind of the notion of IAM, right?
Hmm.
That's all that it was. But in the cloud, least privilege is literally everything, because
Hmm.
now we're talking about EC2s talking to, CloudFront or S3 or these other service, Amazon Kinesis, whatever it might be. Um, and if you just open up that EC2 to everything, like I mentioned before, you're in a really bad situation in your environment. So you have to think from a least privileged perspective, and you should be, every decision that you make in the cloud should be based on, do I need this? Do I need that? What can I live without? Does it need this ability to do this?
Hmm.
I think if you address it from that angle, your the risk to your environment will be significantly decreased. But unfortunately, a lot of companies are, you know, they either have a cloud presence or they're going into the cloud, right now, and they they they're not having, security involved in the architecture and design of it. They're just
Hmm.
saying, okay, we'll plug in security like we did on prem, and they'll be able to fix it. Well, the cloud is a much more massive environment to try and fix.
Yeah. So I want to. I mean, it absolutely makes sense that to follow least privilege, and you highlighted few other areas in your presentation also, like providing areas like excessive permissions or misconfigurations or privilege escalations. One of the challenge that we see often with either startups or growing organizations is they provide overly permissive access to avoid any business impact, because it takes time, right, to understand what is the right permission that should be provided to, let's say, a developer so that they can do some work. And because of that, uh, they like some developers have overly permissive access. So how should security leaders navigate this like find a balance in between implementing a least privilege and at the same time not impacting the business, the speed of deploying new capabilities?
Yeah, so really, the whole point of the cloud is to enable your developers or your engineers to build whatever they want, whatever the business needs. The
Hmm.
whole purpose of cloud security is to enable them to do all of that, but in a secure way. And I think that
Right.
that's really important. Security should not be, it shouldn't be the destination where people go and they just get no every single time they ask for something. Security should be the department of yes, but because it has different caveats. It has different situations where it's like, do you want this S3 bucket public? Yeah, we can do that, but we're going to secure it a different way. Like
Hmm.
there's definitely options to this. And so really this starts from an organization or a business buy-in into
Hmm.
security. And so the security leaders at the organization, they need to get the buy-in from all of the business executives, first and foremost. Those business executives need to be able to agree that, hey, yeah, we need to be able to deploy what we want to deploy in this environment, but we also need to do it in a secure way so we don't get breached. And then we're
Hmm.
paying all these fines and loss of reputation and whatnot. And then once you get that buy in, you want to create a policy. The policy actually outlines the guidelines of what's expected in this environment. And then once you complete those 2 feats, now you have to, really directly address these issues with the people that are creating the issues. So you have to be working hands on with the developers and saying, hey, you can use this service, or you can create this way, um, or you can create it, but I need you to do it this way, right?
Hmm.
And it's all a song and dance, so to speak, of trying to navigate this, and making sure that everyone is enabled to do their job correctly, that they can do what they want to do in the environment, but that it's not putting the environment at risk.
Makes absolute sense. I was hoping there would be like a magic formula which organizations can just use, but it doesn't look like there is one. So a follow up question to that is like mm, often, like as I was highlighting, if it's an early stage company, they focus on business objectives more than security sometimes. What other patterns have you noticed where security is not paid enough attention? Like, is it the training, or is it the culture, like any other factors which play into it?
Yeah, I would say training and culture is definitely a huge thing. um when you think of security training, right,
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10 you're going to think about that yearly video that you have to
Right.
watch, and that's considered to be security training.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was a good idea that worked, for the most part. But
Mm-hmm.
now these attackers are getting so sophisticated that, I mean, they're able to fool security professionals, right? So this training has to be augmented. It has to be enhanced in some way within the environment. And that means that your security team needs to get hands on with the rest of the organization to really ensure that they're up to speed and that they're trained the ways that they should be. Recently, I actually, had a phishing email come through just literally a couple days ago. And this phishing email was extremely convincing. Extremely convincing. It didn't have a link in it. It came from an internal,
Oh.
email address, right? It looked correct. But what they were asking me to do didn't make any sense for my role.
Aha.
And they were asking for a payroll situation, right? And yeah,
Interesting.
if it's a real person, I feel for you, right? Because I want to get paid too.
Mm-hmm.
But you're in the completely wrong section of the business. Like, I don't know anyone even in that department. And they
Mm-hmm.
were, trying to just get me like on the phone, to continue the conversation. And
Oh, okay.
I was talking to an expert at a email security company, and he said, yeah, there's, attackers out there that are getting, smarter and realizing that people like you don't click on links anymore. And so they just want the conversation to keep evolving, build the rapport with you. And then when they think that you're in a good place with your trust with them, then
Mm-hmm.
they will send over the link. Then they will give you a phone call and, just give you a little bit, like a little nugget more for you to do, and just keep
Mm-hmm.
on building that rapport with you, which is actually, that's how government agents are compromised. They
Yeah.
ask for
Yeah.
one small thing, and then they get another small request, seemingly very insignificant. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why would anyone want to know the name of just any random person that works in this building?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll give you a name for 10 grand. I'll give you a name. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these attackers are picking up on that mentality, and they're playing that within the organization now.
Wow, yeah, I must say this is very sophisticated attack, right? That there is no link, so that means you will not be suspicious, because now with all of the attacks that we have heard about or read about, we often expect that there would be a link, and the moment we don't see a link, the suspicion in our mind goes down as well. So yeah, I love how these attackers are trying to sort of attack and get information. um, and
Yeah,
the key word that you highlighted is that trust, right? Like, they are using smaller chunks of information. They are trying to get smaller chunks of information from you, and trying to build trust at the same time, so that they can send you a link or something once that trust is built, and then you're sort of compromised, right?
It's interesting, and this is
Hmm.
happening to everyday employees, at everyone's company, right? Like, not everyone is going to be as paranoid as a security professional is, nor should they be. I'm
Yeah.
in security because I'm paranoid like that, right? I don't click on links. If someone sends me a link, I'm calling them and saying, "Hey, did you just send me this?" Like that's how I
Yeah,
am, right?
makes
But
sense.
now it's like an unfair playing field.
And particularly during this time of the year, like these phishing attacks mm, happen a lot, right? Because it's holidays, a lot of folks are like spending, buying, so you might receive a link and you just click on it, right, and you get compromised. uh, it's funny how attackers are also evolving to use new psychological ways of uh, like attacking others.
Yeah, I mean they're taking the mentality. I don't mean to cut you off, but they're taking the mentality that the military has towards compromising someone, and
Mhm.
they're employing that in their own attacks.
True, true. I have one last question on the IAM. So we spoke, like you highlighted that IAM has become the new perimeter. Um, Earlier, it used to be network. So we spoke about few things which can be done right. What would be top five considerations that you have that you would recommend to, let's say, a matured organization when dealing with IAM?
Hmm. Top five. So I
Mm-hmm,
would say, least privilege would be at the very top um, of that list, of course. Then I would start looking at overly permissive roles, and then overly used roles. So those are two different,
wow.
categories of I guess vulnerabilities or attack surfaces in the cloud for sure. And then we have privileged account management, so when you log into your cloud environment, you shouldn't have, full root access to your cloud environment. It should have a very low level privilege account, and then you escalate that permission, as you need it for just in time access.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I would focus on MFA, of course. If you don't have MFA in 2023, you're like not even in the game right now.
Yeah, I was waiting for MFA. Like, what's the priority in your list? But Yeah, absolutely. Like, MFA has become a standard nowadays.
Right. Yeah. I put MFA lower because it's almost expected that everyone has MFA now. Like
Yes.
it's 2023. We've known about MFA for a while. It should be something that's put in automatically. It's still, you know, not always put in automatically for
Mhm.
organizations. But there's other things that increase your attack surface significantly, like the other four things that I mentioned that
Mhm.
kind of trump, MFA. Like if you don't have MFA, then you're in a bad
uh,
position.
Absolutely. That's spot on. Thank you so much, Joe, for the insightful conversation. Here are a few important points I gathered. Security of cloud IAM requires a different mindset than traditional IAM. Once credentials are breached, attackers gain access to all the infrastructure in a cloud environment. So that is one of the primary reasons why IAM is the new perimeter. Second one is to address IAM security gaps. Start with owners of IAM resources using tags. Clean up inactive users, inactive roles, inactive permissions, and optimize for duplicate roles or duplicate permissions. And the last one is security buy-in is key from the leaders. This helps security teams enforce security best practices in a collaborative manner. Thank you. With this, we end part one of our discussion with Joe. Today, we focused on IAM security. We'll be back for part two, where we'll discuss primarily on cloud security. Make sure you don't miss it. See you in the next episode. Thank you.